We are back in Barcelona for the final leg of the second triple header of the season. And like Imola, it looks like it'll be the last time at this track, with the Spanish Grand Prix moving to Madrid starting next year. But the focus this weekend isn't really on saying goodbye to Catalunya. The biggest news is the start of the new technical directive for front wing flexibility. And there's a lot of optimism that these changes could really change a lot with the pecking order of the grid. Now remember, this started right away in Australia for rear wings, but the FIA decided to give teams a little bit of time to adjust to the regulation changes with the front wings. So what are these new directives? Basically, the FIA tests wing flexibility in two ways using static tests. For the first test, they apply 1,000 newtons of force downward on the front wings. Up until this weekend, the front wings were allowed to flex up to 15 millimeters when the force was applied to both sides of the front wing, and up to 20 millimeters when the force was applied to one side of the front wing. Now with these new directives, that's reduced to 10 millimeters when the force is applied to both sides, and 15 millimeters when it's applied to one side. The second test the FIA uses is more focused on the front wing flaps. For this one, they apply only 60 newtons of force downward on the wing. Before this weekend, those flaps were allowed to flex up to 5 millimeters, and now they can only flex up to 3 millimeters. So you look at these changes, and you pull out a ruler, and you think, okay, what's this going to matter? This isn't going to make any difference. And you're right, it seems like a really minuscule difference. But when you're talking about cars going 200 miles an hour and being separated by tenths, hundredths, sometimes even thousandths of a second, it can make a big difference. So who are the rules going to affect the most? The truth is, no one really knows. But the popular theory is it's going to affect the teams who invested most in wing flexibility, and that would be McLaren and Mercedes out of the top teams. There's a lot of speculation and hope that this is going to hurt McLaren the most and bring them back within striking range of the top teams. And it makes sense. McLaren has by far been the best when it comes to wing flexibility, and that's a big reason why we've seen them look so dominant since around this time last year. I do think McLaren will lose some of their advantage. I just don't know if it will be big enough to even the playing field. Because McLaren's advantage isn't just wing flexibility, it's also this brake cooling design that saves their tires more than everyone else. You also have to think too, wing flexibility isn't completely going away. The wings just aren't going to flex as much. So if McLaren was so much better at mastering the old regulations, why wouldn't you expect them to be better at getting these right too? Wing flexibility has been a strength of McLaren's, there's no doubt, but it's not their end-all be-all either. This car's strength is about the entire package, not just one singular component. So if McLaren falls behind anyone, I think it'll only be Red Bull, but I still have doubts about that even happening. The other top team that's gained the most with wing flexibility is Mercedes. Unlike McLaren though, they don't have a second trick to rely on that makes you think things wouldn't change that much for them. And the other thing to worry about is how unstable this car has already looked with certain setup changes and how inconsistent it can be at times. What's concerning for Mercedes is they brought a new front wing to Imola 2 weekends ago. And we've known this regulation change was coming for months. So it doesn't make sense that they bring an upgrade that doesn't comply with the new rules. Instead, it makes a lot more sense that this new wing complies with the new regulations, and they just wanted to test it out for a couple races before everyone else. And you look at where Mercedes was the last 2 races, it's been awful. Now the real question is whether this is how much everyone will fall off, or if this is something that's specific to Mercedes. We don't know until we see everyone on track in FP1, but it feels like Mercedes might be the one who loses the most with the changes, and we might have already gotten a taste of that. There's a flip side to this too, though. Red Bull and Ferrari seem pretty confident that they're going to benefit the most from these regulation changes. Both have been cautiously optimistic, and it makes sense when you look at how these cars have been developed. They've put the least amount of effort and resources into this area, so it makes sense that things won't change as much for them. My question, though, is whether they think they'll actually gain performance with the regulation changes, or if it'll be more of a situation where the teams that have benefited, McLaren, Mercedes, will just be brought down to their level. Let's start with Red Bull. They are very confident that all of these changes will work in their favor starting this weekend. Christian Horner's been saying it for months, and the message has been pretty clear and consistent. The stiffer the wings are, the better it is for Red Bull. But will that really be the case? I think their hopes with these new regulations is more about their optimism that McLaren will lose a lot and will be brought down to their level opposed to Red Bull actually gaining performance. but I do expect to see the gap close between Red Bull and McLaren. You look at this season and you say, okay, where's McLaren's advantage? And it's really in two major areas: wing flexibility and tire saving. So the idea, obviously, is that the wing flexibility advantage will be somewhat neutralized with these changes. But the advantage Red Bull has that the others don't is the upgrade package they brought to Imola. They figured out their tire management problems with that package. And they might not have enough to match the tire cooling setup that McLaren has until they bring their own design, but they have enough to be close enough to win on the right day, at the right track, like we saw in Imola. What I do still worry about with Red Bull, though, is really the same concern with Mercedes. They've struggled a lot finding the right balance and operating window for this car, so could these changes actually undo all of the work they've done in this area and put the car back on a knife's edge where it has no consistency? That's what Red Bull has to watch out for the most. If they have these issues, these regulation changes could go a lot differently than they expect. But if they don't have these issues, they could be in a great position for at least Max to make a serious push for the Drivers' Championship. It's a little different story with Ferrari. They're also pretty confident heading into these new changes, but it's clear their confidence comes from the fact that they've been the most conservative in the development in this area, and they just expect the teams ahead of them to drop to their level. So yeah, I fully expect Ferrari to be affected the least by these changes, but the bad news is Ferrari's not coming from a good starting point. So the other teams will really have to drop significantly for Ferrari to be competitive on a consistent basis. And I have a hard time seeing the others drop that much in performance. Teams have known about this regulation change for months. They've had plenty of time to adjust and develop their cars to comply with these new rules. This wasn't something that was announced last week or 2 weeks ago and everyone's scrambling to adjust. Teams are prepared for this. But on top of that, you also think, okay, we don't know how drastic it will be, but we expect McLaren to have a dip. We expect Mercedes to as well, but not really Red Bull. So maybe Ferrari closes the gap to McLaren and Mercedes, but Red Bull's been a step ahead of them. And there's a good chance they'll still be a step ahead coming out of this weekend. I won't harp on it too much because I've talked about it with the other teams, but I also have the same concerns with Ferrari's setup issues that I have with Mercedes and Red Bull. We've seen it all season. They've struggled to find the consistency with this car. One weekend it's good, one weekend it's not. We'll have to watch out for that moving forward. But the other struggle Ferrari's had this season is how bad they are in slow speed corners. And it was a surprise that they performed so well in Monaco with all the slow speed corners there, but that track is an outlier, and even the team wasn't confident that they had solved that problem coming out of that race weekend. And these changes with wing flexibility aren't going to solve that problem either. I'm not the most optimistic about Ferrari with the new rules. It might look a little better than it has so far this season, but I think there's a good chance they still look like the third or fourth best team coming out of this weekend. This just isn't about the top teams, though. There's a good chance the order of the midfield shakes up too. We've seen a lot of development in this area from Alpine, from Haas, from Aston Martin. And on the flip side, we haven't seen a lot from the Racing Bulls, Williams, and Sauber. Like the top teams, you expect the teams who put the most into wing flexibility to lose the most. And you'd expect the conservative teams to gain the most. And you look at how close the midfield has been on track with the timings and in the constructors' standings, this could change a lot with the pecking order, probably more than the top teams. All right, let's finish up with some predictions for the race on Sunday. Before that, though, I'd really keep an eye on the practice sessions this weekend. Most weekends, not a lot to take away from them. And the teams aren't even running their cars at full performance, but I expect this weekend to be different. I don't think we're going to see teams turning their engines down in FP1 and FP2 like we usually do. Everyone's going to want to get on track and see where they stand with their new front wings. And they're also going to want to do as many laps as they can to optimize the car setup for Sunday and make sure that they have it right. It's not going to be determinative, but we should know a lot more heading into qualifying than we usually do. For the race, though, I think this is going to be very similar to what we saw in Imola. This circuit has a lot of high-speed corners, but it's also hard to pass here too. Now, they did help things by taking out that stupid chicane at the end of the lap a few years ago, which gives drivers a better chance to overtake going into turn 1. Other than that, though, not a lot of opportunities. So like it usually is, qualifying is going to be very important, and who comes out ahead after the first few turns in the race will be very important too. My podium predictions for Sunday, though. P3, Lando Norris. P2, Oscar Piastri in P1 taking home his third victory of the year. I've got Max Verstappen. I really like Max's prospects this weekend. And I don't think it'll be something attributed to wing flexibility. I think they're just going to be very quick around here, and it'll be a very similar performance to what we saw from them in Imola. I don't think the McLarens will be far behind, but I think they will be behind. And in that battle between the two, I just think Oscar's going to have the edge over Lando this weekend. Even with the momentum that Lando's been building over the last few races, I just feel like Oscar takes it back a little bit this weekend. If I'm right about the top three, though, that's going to put Oscar in first in the driver's standings with 179 points, Lando in second with 173, and Max in third with 161. Things could get very interesting in the championship fight if Max and Red Bull can get it right this weekend. Behind the top three, though, I think it'll be Ferrari. And not that they'll necessarily be close. I just think Mercedes is really going to fall off considering what we've seen from them the last two races. Mercedes should be next in order behind them, though. And usually after this is where we start to see Williams pop up. But there's a good chance they struggle this weekend when you look at the track's characteristics and the strengths of that car. So I think if we do start to see midfield teams start to mix things up a little bit in this part of the grid, it's probably going to be the Racing Bulls. The fun part about this weekend, though, is we can make all of the educated predictions we want, but we just don't know. The new regulations could do a lot. They could do very little, but we'll really start to figure all of this out in FP1 on Friday. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode previewing the Spanish Grand Prix. I know, quick episode today, but like I said, we can make all of the educated guesses we want about the flexi wing technical directives and what they'll do to the order of the grid, but we're not going to know until we see cars on track. So there's a lot of anticipation, and I'd really stay tuned in for the entire weekend, because once those free practice sessions start, we're really going to get an idea for how all of this is shaking out. I will, of course, be back with another episode on Sunday recapping the Spanish Grand Prix, and I'm thinking we're going to have a lot to talk about. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. Till next time.